phrase keeping the lights on has been bandied around for years in the energy sector. Yet this year, Europe has learnt the hard way that sometimes the lights just go off. What are the flexibility and resiliency issues that need to be addressed to make sure that that doesn't happen again? That's what I'm here in Brussels to find out by asking a series of energy experts. What are the lessons from the Iberia blackout?
I think the first thing we need to do after the Iberia blackout is stop politicizing the message and try to go to the basics of the technical reasons behind what it happened. So we should stop trying to blame renewables and the penetration of renewables for causing that, and try to address how these renewables are being brought into the grid and learn from what has happened. And how can we address that better in a technical way and integrate this penetration of renewables in a more efficient way and a more resilient way. And that we can take that learning from Spain and use it across Europe.
Kelvin, I think the key lessons from the Iberia blackout so far, well firstly, you've got to remember that blackouts like this, they're like plane crashes. You know, you tend to have multiple things going wrong that shouldn't, and something extreme beyond your security standards or beyond the planning standards. But certainly what it has done is brought to the top of everyone's priority list the need to make sure that they're on top of all of the technical measures and the market measures that they need to get to regular, very high renewables operations. And that is really that you've got a technical plan and the technical models, and you're looking at them properly, that get you through to zero carbon. You've got the measurement on the grid of the variables that people have been talking about after the Iberian blackout, like inertia, like voltage stability, that you're on top of that, and that you're making the market changes. I won't name too many things because Red Electrica and REN have been working really hard. They've set the pace on some of this over the last 20 years.
Interconnectors and digital technologies are key to balancing supply and demand across regions.
In terms of interconnection, when this thing happened, very quickly France isolated themselves, which put a lot of stress on the Spanish side. And I think what's interesting is today the EU directive is there should be something like 15% exchange of energy as an average. Spain is at only 3%. So there is still a lot of work to be done. I would say contingency planning needs to really be much more forward-looking, and potentially the systems of the past need to evolve because there's lots of data. It took 13 hours for restoration. That's a lot, right? So of course, I think our operators were doing a great job there. Not easy, keeping lights on, but we have lots to learn and move forward.
Renewables are now central to Europe's energy mix. However, their intermittency means we require a smarter, more flexible and resilient grid. Sabine, what can Europe do to make itself even more grid resilient?
I mean, first of all, we have a pretty resilient system. The challenge is keeping it resilient without creating more buffers and spare space in the system. And to me, there are two answers really. One is making data-driven decisions down to all voltage levels. We're pretty good at the high voltage, but maybe not that much on medium and low voltage, certainly not. And the second one then is flexibility. Mastering flexibility makes the system more resilient because you have more options on reacting when things are happening.
I think in order to make the grid more resilient in Europe, we need to look at it from a more technical perspective and dimension it correctly. We need to categorize the different technologies and different users as what they are. So by that I mean, for example, batteries as a way of making it more resilient instead of just seeing that as a consumer or as a generator. And then as well, we need to address subjects around NIMBYism and not having political, regional issues stopping the integration of different regions within the same country or even between different countries. So keep the whole discussion at a technical level and try to make it as less political as possible to actually integrate those technologies that we need for the grid.
As the grid becomes more digital, it also becomes more vulnerable to sabotage, cyber attack and extreme weather.
So a lot of good work has started on the resiliency piece, but I would say invest, cyber, and flexibility. These are the three things to still catch out for. Geopolitical situation, cyber risks are growing in this region of the world, and that's a key determination. So we need to follow much more the ENSO and other national codes to guarantee the grid resilience. We are talking of investment from a long time, but I think the speed and the velocity needs to pick up much more. So we are talking of up to 500 billion euros of investment that the grid needs to meet our net zero goal. So this is not the speed that we are seeing on the ground. And of course, expanding flexibility, because we know that we have to tap into a lot of resources beyond the meters. And this is where, as an example, on storage today, we are tapping only 6 gigawatts and we need to go up to 200 by 2030.
And how does grid resilience become climate resilience? Does grid resilience become climate resilience?
I would argue it has to. I think at the end of the day, the grid has to follow the climate very much hand in hand, because what's the point of having a lot of renewable production that we have that we cannot integrate inside the grid? So that means the climate needs to be fundamentally inbuilt inside the grid piece. I can give you an example. Today, over 1700 gigawatt is sitting that cannot be connected because the grid is not ready to take all that renewable energy. So that's sort of stopping us in our energy transition journey back to climate resiliency, right? Major event management. I think that's something we have so many different cases we see around the world, like just coming from California, billions of euros of losses. So it's all about predicting the future. And now with different digital technologies, satellite imaging, there are technologies. So I think clearly there is no option for the grid's resilience and climate resilience to go in different paths.
And how does grid resilience become climate resilience?
Resilient grid gives us climate resilience in the sense that the electricity is one of the major contributors to the emission problem that we have and to global climate change. So with making the grid more resilient, we're addressing the key of the issue. So we can start by the sector coupling, sort of integrating heat and transport into the electricity sector, and by that removing some of other extra polluters that we have in Europe. By addressing that as well, we're going to make sure that we don't have issues like what we had in Spain that we were just earlier discussing. That gives us a good example of real life of what can happen if our grid fails and how our society is depending on it. So we need to make sure that that doesn't happen again, and we need to create the right investment environment for those technologies to be there and address the issue.
When you think about climate resilience and grid resilience, if you ask 5 people, you'll get 10 different answers, yeah? But to me, climate resilience is about making sure that we're ready for the climate change that we know we've got baked in, but that also we're making sure that economically, we're ready for those changes, but we're ready to actually deliver the changes needed to stop climate change going further. And that is where grid resilience becomes absolutely key. If you talk to the International Energy Agency, electricity is going to move from about 25% of all the energy in our economy to between 50 and 75%. So that means that most of the economy is being electrified. With that comes a huge focus on making sure that the grid expands to meet that demand, but that also it remains secure and resilient to the flooding, the higher temperatures, the change in weather systems that you get with that climate change.
Europe's grid is both the backbone and the nervous system of a net zero continent, and as such, it needs to be built for the future. And in terms of determining the future, what are the megatrends determining grid evolution?
I get that question asked a lot. So basically we see like 5 big, what we call the mega forces, right, that's sort of driving this industry. So the first one is a lot of push on energy transition and decarbonization, right? So we really see the renewable take-up happening, a lot of promises, but a lot of projects also happening. Like in Europe, 42% of all the generation should move to renewable by 2040, which is a big ambition. Aging. What I mean by aging is aging network, aging workforce. Do you know most of our grid, 40% of the grid in Europe was actually built in 1950s and 1960s. So, and then the other one, which is pretty interesting, is aging workforce. Almost more than 30% of our workforce will be retiring in the next 10 years. So aging is a big, let's say, trend. Cybersecurity, I talked about cyber threats, especially in Europe, has gone up 2 times in the last couple of years with the geopolitical risk. And last is events. Talking about events, we see that today over all the blackouts that we see in the electrical space, 80% of that are linked back to some weather event. So when we connect to all this, what I would say is the next 20 years ahead of us will be very different, with a huge rising demand with electrification and everything that we have heard of. So the next 20 years will be a historic, pivotal movement in this industry compared to the last 50 years. So that's what's exciting.